Hello, welcome to this video. Imagine your house is on fire and you get sent up into your record room and you have to grab those essential jazz albums. They're the ones you're going to take away with you. Well, that is what I've been looking at this month. I've been doing it for like prog, I've been doing it for fusion, and now it comes to doing it for jazz. So here is not going to be my 10 most essential jazz albums of all time. I'm afraid it's going to be my 30 because I couldn't whittle it down to 10. I've got to be really honest. Most of these albums are as great as each other. So I kept just pulling them out until I felt satisfied that I'd got everything, as though it was for real, that I'd actually got the albums I needed. It was 30 albums, right? Give or take. I had to chuck a couple of out actually. So now I've got it down to 30. So rather than doing that all in one video, I'm going to do it over 3 videos. And this is going to be part 1, where we look from number 30 down to number 21. Each of these videos is going to contain great jazz albums. And also, remember, these are my essential albums and I've picked them from my collection. There's a whole bunch of essential jazz albums that I haven't got a copy of, or I've lost my copy. And so I cannot put them on the list. It has to be here in the back. And part of this is to do this for me. If I really feel that a certain record is missing, then I've really got to go out and get it, haven't I? Because you have to have those essential albums. You have to own them. Now, a couple of rules. A few more rules on this one. The next rule is that you can't have an artist twice. So once I've picked something by Miles Davis, that's it, it's in. No, that's the first rule. Second rule, there can be no fusion. There can be no jazz rock. It has to be jazz, straight down the line, proper jazz from the classic era of jazz. Now, that really means I wasn't really going to put in any album after 1980, although there is one album which really shows that in the last 40 years, there's one jazz album that I rate very, very highly. And when I saw it, I thought, I've got to have this on the list. It's surprising what it is. It's the first one on the list as well, so you won't have to wait long to find that out. But I think apart from that, that's all the rules done. Is there any other rules? Yeah, it's not subjective, and it's not objective either. It's somewhere in the middle. I do think all these albums are essential jazz albums, but I've also used my own taste, and with certain artists where I've heard a certain album so many times, I've pulled another one out. I thought, no, I'd be happy to explore that one in the future on my desert island with my 30 jazz albums. And I have to be honest, I think I'd be happy with I'd be happy with these albums more than even the prog and the fusion, to be honest. As I get older, this is the music I want to listen to more and more. So, shall we start at number 30, shall we? So at number 30, have that one album that was made after 1980. In fact, it was made after 1996. And I believe it to be an utter masterpiece of pure jazz. It's not fusioning at all. It's pure jazz. It's an incredible album. And I know I've built it up and you'll all want to go and listen to it. It's incredible. It's actually the Branford Marsalis trio, and it's an album called The Dark Keys. Now, this is basically a very interesting trio, and I think this is why I like it, in that it's got Branford Marsalis on tenor and soprano saxophone. It's also got Reginald Veal on bass and Jeff Tain Watts on drums. So these are 3 of the greatest musicians working in jazz in the last 40 years. No piano, no chords. There's a freedom to this. And Branford Marsalis seems to take all the history of jazz, the hard bop, the bebop, the free jazz, the post-free jazz, and the sort of, what shall we call it, the retro jazz that he pioneered along with his brother. But I feel that Branford was always willing to push the envelope more. And on here, it's an incredible blend that is not that free, but is made more free for being just a trio. Now, there's a couple of guests on here as well, and I'm greedy, you see, because we've also got Kenny Garrett on one track and Joe Lovano on another track. And they are 2 of the other great saxophone players of the last 40 years. So by having this album, I get a little bit of those 2 guys, especially Kenny Garrett, who I believe is, you know, probably after David Sanborn, the most important alto sax stylist, you know, since him. You know, absolute, one of my favourite musicians all time. That's a cracking album. I'm not going to say much more about it, but we're done. Right, so The next one was a bit of a troublesome one because I own a lot of albums by this guy, but not necessarily original albums. I've got a lot of best-ofs and a couple of originals, but I thought I'm going to have to go with a best-of. And this is the other thing that's going to upset the purist, is there are certain albums that are greatest hits albums, and I like those albums, and they're on this list. So that's the way it is. If you don't like it, then it's tough. But if I was to grab a Wes Montgomery album, and I have to own a Wes Montgomery album if I'm going off, escaping the flames, which one am I going to pick? Well, I decided to go for this one. It was brought out on Verve Records. It's called Wes Montgomery, and it's called Talking Verve Montgomery, The Roots of Acid Jazz, which is a little bit of a cash-in when this came out. But of course, Wes Montgomery is the roots of acid jazz. And with Wes, you have a whole bunch of really flying post-hard bop albums. That's what all the super fans like. Then you get a load of funky albums at the same time, sort of almost like organ trio funky albums. They're wonderful. And then you have some of his sort of very middle-of-the-road Beatles covers albums. And I believe that this actually, in trying to put across the funkier aspects of Wes, just gets into the area that I'd like to keep. But there is some proper flying stuff. I mean, because they've got impressions on here, which is him on his sort of most virtuoso in-your-face playing. There's some great stuff. They've got the Thumb on here, Moving Wes Part 1 and 2. It's just a night train, very funky. 74 minutes long. It's just a great album. I think if I was going to grab one of my Wes Montgomery albums, it would be that one. So I know this is not a purist list. And I know jazz fans, they don't like things that aren't pure, do they? They don't like it, but that's what you're going to get with here. What you got here is a list made out of my love of this music. And these albums belong to me and my dad, all right? And my dad started collecting albums in the mid-1950s. So this collection goes back 70 years. They've been in the Edwards family for 70 years. That's what you're looking at here. So this collection has been bred over time. Now, the next one, I thought I need to represent British jazz. I didn't want to get too much British jazz on here, but I thought I'm going to have some sort of British jazz. Oh, and I wish I had a Joe Harriott album. I haven't actually got any Joe Harriott in my collection. Stan Tracy. There's a whole bunch of people that I wish I had. And then there's the new guys like Courtney Pine and, Andy Shepherd. There's a whole bunch of people. But I thought, let's just pick up an album which just represents that classic 1950s modern jazz. And I pulled this one. It's one of my dad's, and it is the Jazz Couriers live in concert with Ronnie Scott and Tubby Hayes, right? The lineup on this is absolutely incredible. It was recorded live on the 16th of February in 1958 at the Dominion Theatre. And the lineup is Ronnie Scott on tenor sax and then the incredible Tubby Hayes. And that's why I've picked it, because Tubby Hayes, he's one of those jazz musicians that could take on the American guys. In fact, his virtuosity was quite incredible, almost like a British Coltrane. But he's his own player. We've also got Terry Shannon on piano, Phil Bates on bass, and Bill Eden on drums. So this album here, you could see for an album that's pretty old, it's been pretty well looked after. And the reason for that is because I can remember picking up a copy of Record Collector many years ago, and it had the most expensive albums in terms of collectibles, and this one was here, and I went, oh my, I've got it. So I went and put it into storage, thinking it was worth hundreds of pounds. As I've got older, I think I've realised that I don't think it's this one they're after, because this one is on the Music for Pleasure label, which was sort of a budget label. So I don't think it's this one that they're saying is super rare. But in the end, it looks like the original artwork, doesn't it? What do you think? It's got the original liner notes on it. I don't know. Maybe some people will be saying, no, Andy, that one is worth something. In the end, it's the same music, isn't it? That makes no difference. And it's my dad's, and he bought it, and he was a jazz drummer in the late 50s. He was into modern jazz, and he bought albums, and this was one of the albums he owned. So he was a tiny part of this scene. My dad actually did audition for the Basil Kirchner Orchestra in the late 50s. And the guys were impressed. They loved his playing, but Basil Kirchner noticed the fact that my dad could not read music. And he shouted him out and he said, "You sound great." He said, "But you can't read the dots, can you?" And my dad said, "No." But my dad, being a 1950s gentleman, had lied and said he could read music and thought he might be able to get away with it. Which he didn't, because musicians know more than you think. Even the drugged up, crazy and wild brain of Basil Kirchin. I like the fact I got Basil Kirchin. So we are now on, right, we've done 30, we've done 29, we've done 28, so we're now on to 27. This is a bit of a greedy guts choice. I'd not say this is the greatest jazz album in the world. I like it very much. I've had it in my collection for a long, long time, although I don't think it's one of my dad's. I think I picked this up at a very young age, at sort of a second-hand shop or maybe an antiques fair. I used to go to the antiques fairs in the early 80s with my mum and dad, and I used to get bored stiff looking at all of these vases and, you know, Nazi memorabilia, and I used to look around hoping there'd be at least a box full of records, and if there was, then I'd take an hour choosing which one to get. And I believe I got this out of one of those antiques fairs. It is an album called The Jazz Giants, and I've got it because the lineup's just ridiculous. This is the Oscar Peterson trio, which means I can get, you know, because it's not actually under the Oscar Peterson name, I can get 2 Oscar Peterson albums in on the list, right? But the lineup's incredible. It's the Oscar Peterson trio with Herb Ellis and Ray Brown. They've added Louis Bellson on drums, one of the greatest jazz drummers of all time, an absolute virtuoso. One of my favourite jazz musicians is on here, Jerry Mulligan, along with Stan Getz, another one of my favourite players, and Harry Edison, not one of my favourite, but a great player. And, you know, this is just a standard jazz album from the 1950s. This is when people listened to jazz and bought jazz. I think the cover looks great. It's got Chocolate Sundae on it, When Your Lover Has Gone, Candy, and then there's a ballad melody where they get Lush Life with Mulligan on, and then Lullaby of Leaves with Edison on, and then Making Whoopee with Ray Brown taking a solo, and then It Never Entered My Mind with Stan Getz, and then it's got Woody Knew. So this is made 1958. What an album. I want to have a look inside of this one. So let's see what we've actually got going on, because it feels very thick, and people have said they would like to look at the labels, especially so with the old ones. I'm going to show you the labels because there might be people who can say, "Oh, that's a so-and-so album." Obviously in the UK we had CBS, didn't we? We didn't have Columbia, so this looks like could it have been imported in? I do not know, but this looks like it's pretty old as well. Absolutely brilliant. Now, the one we are about to go to is another one of my dad's records, and it is absolutely super rare. I love all jazz, right? As I've got older, I love the middle of the road jazz, you know, the sweet, accessible, loads of melody, beautiful playing, not all avant-garde and free. I appreciate that just as much. Some of those musicians like George Shearing and Chet Baker make beautiful music, and they're incredible players. In fact, I nearly had a George Shearing, well, I think I did have a George Shearing album on here until I spotted this one in my collection, and I thought, I'm going to have this guy, because I could sit, especially when I get older, if I'm sat on my desert island with all the records I've saved from the fire, I will put this one on more and more, and it's so old. This is a 10-inch album by Erroll Garner that I have in my possession. Doesn't seem to have a title, Jazz Pour 2, and the reason it says Jazz Pour 2 is because this is not just a 10-inch album, it's a French 10-inch album. In the 1950s, my dad as a teenager went over to Paris, and I believe they went to see someone live. I can't remember who it was. It was a French jazz artist. They didn't go see Charlie Parker or anything like that, like Ronnie Scott did. I think they went to see, I believe they went to a club called the Canapèche. I'm going to get all this down because my dad's dead, and it's like he told me this stuff, so let's get it on record. He went to see the Canapèche. It was a French group. I can't remember what it is. I think my dad's saying. He said I can remember he told me a story about how they were trying to chat up some French girls in the hotel on the floor below on the balcony, and they were like dropping things down to them on string, which sounds like fun. And he went and bought 2 albums. He bought this one and another one, which is also on this list. These are very special albums to me. And this is all in French, look. And this is a 10-inch album. These are very popular. Look how cute that is. You can't get away from that. That's so cute. We can't tell Andy because you need to put it up against another album so that we can tell the scale. We need to see the scale because we want to know how cute this is. So I'm going to go and get the Jazz Giants out. So that's a normal record there, like that. So they're going to tell me off for touching them all like this, but I don't care because they're mine. And this is the little 10-inch one. Oh, look at that. Look at it. 10-inch albums. Can't we have 10-inch albums back? Can you imagine in this new era of downloads where people don't really release albums anymore, where you could just sort of do an EP? This is what we used to call the EPs, but EPs are 45 RPM and they're the same size. I want a cute little 10-inch album. Erroll Garner, I haven't said much about him. Erroll Garner was a very big selling artist in the 1950s, and he was an absolute virtuoso. He used his virtuosity to play beautiful tunes like The Way You Look Tonight, Penthouse Serenade, Indiana, I'm in a Good Mood for Love, Easy to Love, Body and Soul, Mean to Me, I Cover the Waterfront, Play Piano Play, Oh Lady Be Good. We got a whole host of stuff here, even some Garner compositions as well. I can't tell you much about it because it's all French on the end, and you can see where my dad has signed it. Why people would sign their albums in the 1950s, I do not know. Erroll Garner had this beautiful style where he got this lovely languid left-hand chordal style, very rich. And then his soloing would be in a completely different time, very relaxed, very behind the beat. An absolute virtuoso on piano, one of the great jazz musicians. I love Erroll Garner, so he's on that list. Right, this is where it starts to get a little bit contentious. I don't know and I don't care, right? One of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century was Stephane Grappelli. Stephane Grappelli is up there with Louis Armstrong and Charlie Parker as far as I'm concerned. And he's one of the first, if not the first, virtuoso non-American jazz musician. I really should be putting out here the Hot Club of France. And I'm not. Because I feel that my favourite Stephane Grappelli was later on. He developed as a player. He seemed to be able to take on bebop and play along in that style quite happily. And as he went on, he always seemed to be in, full possession of absolute virtuosity and command of his instrument. So I'm just going to go with the album I grew up with. When I was a kid and I searched through my dad's record collection, he had one Stephane Grappelli album. It's another budget album. This is the one I grew up listening to, and it's called The Golden Hour of Stephane Grappelli. That's the album for me. And it's got them all on. Crazy Rhythm, Ain't Misbehaving, I Can't Give You Anything But Love, Running Wild, It Don't Mean Anything If It Ain't Got the Swing. I don't know who's on this album. It's got no lineup on it. It's obviously a sort of 1970s on Pi Records, 1970s budget album. But that's the album that I would take away for me, because not only has it got a whole ton of the best of the Grappelli era from, I think, 50s, 60s, 70s. That's what we've got on here. But it also reminds me of my childhood, and as I get older, those things matter more and more. So next up, right, this next guy I've got on this list is one of the greatest jazz musicians of the 20th century, but not someone I've listened to that much, and not someone I've ever warmed to that much, right? So when I was a kid, I was always listening to jazz radio stations. If I heard an artist I'd like, I'd go out and buy an album. So I heard tons of these albums by this artist, but I never felt motivated to pick one up until I heard this album. Now, the artist is Charlie Mingus. And if I was doing an objective 10 greatest jazz albums of the 20th century, his Are which is a fantastic album, and really good, it's got Goodbye Port by Hat, Boogie Stop Shuffle, a whole bunch of absolute classic stuff on there, would be on the list, but it's not my favourite. And this album is also a classic Mingus album, and I went out and bought this when I heard the track Isabel's Table Dance, which I just thought just burnt. It is, of course, Tijuana Moods by Charlie Mingus. That's my favourite Mingus album. Why? Well, this is a concept album, isn't it? This here, he's exploring the Spanish tinge, as Jelly Roll Morton would have described it. I think this came out in 62, but it was recorded earlier in 1957. The lineup is Mingus on bass, Clarence Shaw on trumpet, Jimmy Nepper on trombone, Curtis Popper, also known as Shafi Hadi, on alto saxophone, Bill Chiglia on piano, Danny Richmond on drums, Frank Dunlop on percussion, and Isabel Morel on castanets. And we got Lonnie Elder doing some shouting and voices on here. And so Isabel's table dance must be named after Isabel Morel. See, we learn things just by reading the back. But I think he had some incredible players in his band, didn't he, Mingus? He had one of the greatest soloists, so one of my favourite jazz musicians, period, which is Eric Dolphy. And I could go for one of the Eric Dolphy albums, but I have to be honest. Curtis Porter, also known as Shafi Hadi, on alto sax just flies on this album, and it swings. It swings. Now, I know Mingus swings, but for me, this really swings. Great tracks, Dizzy Moods as well, Los Mariachis, which is, there's two epics on here, both 10 minutes long, and that's another epic. We've got Flamingo on here and the very short Tijuana Gift Shop. Of course, Charlie Mingus in 1962 said this is the best album he ever made. So this is a good Mingus album, and that's my favourite Mingus album, and that's the one I would be taking with me. Right, we are back down to we were at number 24. No, we were 23, and then we got 22 and 21 to come, and then we'll be at the end of this video, and I will have got it through it quite quick. For me, that's interesting. I've only done 20 minutes. You know, that's interesting, isn't it? And I think it's because I'm taking it in a lot more relaxed. But now you're waffling, and just keep on with it. Right, free jazz, troublesome free jazz. I'm a massive free jazz fan. I like the old free jazz. Didn't want to fill it up with free jazz, but I want to have some on here. So I identified 2 albums I was going to have. And I thought, what free jazz album would I really love? And it's not Albert Ayler, it's not Archie Shepp, I'm afraid. I do love those. But there's an exoticness and humour to this, and a seriousness as well, that I absolutely love. Plus the cover's pretty cool. So at number 23, I've got Phase 1 by the Art Ensemble of Chicago. Don't they look magnificent there? Recently, I've got back into Lester Bowie. I was listening to The Great Pretender that he did on ECM Records, and realised what an absolute virtuoso trumpet player he is. So powerful, so commanding. The great free jazz albums seem to be looking at the future, but also going right to the beginnings of jazz and blues and the African-American experience. All that is combined, and really trying to take the essence of jazz and to follow those things in its DNA back to Africa, which is a difficult thing to do because it's not a straight line like you think. This one is incredible. So the Art Ensemble of Chicago was sort of a percussion-heavy free jazz band. Eventually they signed to ECM Records, and they calmed their style down to make some quite accessible and very beautiful albums. But this is right in the early days when they're really flying. They came out of Chicago's AACM, which was a bunch of musicians in Chicago that had set up a sort of very creative and artistic. I haven't mentioned the AACM at all on here. People like Roscoe Mitchell was one of them, who is, of course, a member of the Art Ensemble. Who wasn't? Was Mulhauer Richard Abrams a member of it? Doesn't matter. You know, if I was going to do a lecture on the AACM, I should have done a little bit of research. So they're probably the most famous product of that group, the Art Ensemble of Chicago. Very percussion heavy. The members, absolute legends. Lester Bowie on trumpet, flugelhorn, and also he played steer horns on this album. We got Roscoe Mitchell on soprano sax, alto sax, bass sax, clarinet, all the sort of winds. He's also playing cymbals, gongs, and conga drums. There's a lot of percussion in this, which is another reason why I probably love it so much. The great Joseph Jarman, also on soprano sax, alto sax, tenor sax, Malachi Favors on bass, Fender bass, banjo, log drums, and of course Don Moy on drums, bass, marimba, tempo blocks. If we look at them, you know, they look like they were in they're in a garden there, getting ready to have a bit of a practice there. Trumpet, 2 saxophones, you know, a bass saxophone, and, you know, clarinet, like soprano saxophone, we are really looking almost like a New Orleans front line, augmented by African percussion. So this is a very conscious effort to try and get back to an idea of the black aspect of jazz, which people think I'm against here because I've argued that I don't think jazz is a black music form. And I don't think it is, but I really appreciate creative musicians exploring that aspect of jazz, and that's what we have here. This is a really great album. I always found that a very easy listen for a free jazz album. Shall we move on? Right, so talking of early jazz and making my point with the next choice. At 22, I've got this little album. I don't know what the hell it is. It's on CD. It's called Masters of Jazz, and it's basically a collection of Bix Beiderbecke. Right, so Bix Beiderbecke emerges in jazz groups actually in the late teens. He's right at the beginning of jazz, right at the beginning. Jazz has already burst its banks in New Orleans. It's jazz got famous because it was in Chicago. That's when it started to kick off, and then you had the original Dixieland Jazz Band traveling from Chicago to New York, where the recording studios were. They recorded the jazz, and that version of jazz that they did, which was luckily a really New Orleans jazz as its source, became very popular, and so they started to sign everybody up. And there was a lot of sort of cocktail groups, dance groups, and the teens. Paul Whiteman would be an example of that jumped onto the trend, and it then started to produce a whole bunch of virtuosos. So in the same way, Stephane Grappelli is probably the first absolutely great non-American jazz musician. Bix Beiderbecke is probably the first really, truly great white American jazz musician. Now, this is a contentious subject. I find it very, very interesting. At the time, there was a whole bunch of people that felt that the white jazz musicians were better than the black jazz musicians. And the reason when they thought that, because the music was tamer, basically. Bix Beiderbecke is in that style, but he is an absolute virtuoso. He's such an incredible player, and he's alongside a whole bunch of other people. I would say like people like Adrian Rollini, the guitarist, Eddie Lang. So and all these players are incredible. And these arrangements that they were pioneering in his bands, like the Wolverines and then in the Paul Whiteman group, they sort of bring in elements of Fletcher Henderson, and it really lays the groundwork of swing. And swing is actually a change in style of jazz, a drastic change in style. It's almost like a new style of music, which then becomes the biggest selling music on the planet, and thus making jazz the most important art form of the 20th century. Bix Beiderbecke was an incredible player, loved by Louis Armstrong. He used to get together with Bix and jam with him because he thought he was so great. And of course, Bix adored Louis Armstrong because everybody came out of Louis Armstrong. He was a posh boy from a middle-class family. He sort of went all rogue. They sent him off to university, got drunk and just messed about. He sort of went out and joined these jazz groups his sort of posh family didn't want to know. But then he got very famous. He would send his records home to his parents, and when he died, it was discovered that all these records had just been flung in a cupboard and never listened to. The troubles he had being between that world and the jazz world, and he's having this genius that was so chaotic, meant that in 1931, at the age of something like 28, I think, he died from alcohol, and a very young death, and not the first in jazz history. He was such a great player. I love his playing, and I love the other playing on the records he played on. I wish I could tell you more about the actual lineups. There's some great, I think it would be Rollini, there's some great bass saxophone soloing on this record as well. Can't tell you much about it. It's a budget thing, manufactured by Duet Music, but it's got a whole bunch of great stuff. And the other thing is, the recording quality is very good. For something that's made in the 1920s, this is a very good way of hearing that very early jazz, So, that was at number 22, Bix Beiderbecke. Have I got anything else I feel like I want to say something else about Bix Beiderbecke? There's a lot of information that I want to get across, because I haven't really spoken about him in very much on my channel, but maybe I'll come back to it. Maybe there's something still lurking that needs to be said. Right, this is the other free jazz album I put on the list. I felt I needed to have an Ornette Coleman album on the list, and I thought, well, put Shape of Jazz to Come. Obviously, you were going to have that one. Lonely Woman's absolutely beautiful. I thought, no, if I'm stuck on my island, let's bite the bullet. Let's bite the bullet and get irons into this one. Free jazz. This is the one. Right, this features 2 quartets, all playing at the same time. We've got Ornette Coleman's first quartet, which is him on alto sax, Don Cherry on pocket trumpet, Scott LaFaro, the great Scott LaFaro on bass, and Billy Higgins on drums. Scott LaFaro, of course, if you don't know, was the virtuoso bass player who played with Bill Evans and basically invented virtuoso bass playing. He was he's like one of these guys, you know, died very young in a car crash. There's so many of them. I'm thinking of doing a video where I look at these young jazz musicians who changed the face of jazz. Charlie Christian, Eddie Lang, Bix Beiderbecke, Scott LaFaro, Clifford Jordan. There's just so many of them. They come along, they change the face of jazz, and then they're dead by the time they're like 23 or 24. Scott LaFaro, I think he was 22 or something like this when he died, and he changed the face of jazz by that age. Billy Higgins on drums. And this is also mirrored by another great quartet, which has Eric Dolphy on bass clarinet, Freddie Hubbard on trumpet, Charlie Hayden on bass, and Ed Blackwell drums. What you have on this CD is the free jazz, which is the second take they did on that day. It also includes the first take, which is only 17 minutes long, as opposed to nearly 14 minutes long. 40 minutes long, believe it or not. Now, of course, when you look at the structure of this, the way to approach this is to try and listen to it and separate the 2 groups and then try and see what they're doing. And then with the first take here, we can then to see how structured this is and how not structured this is. Is there soloing? Is there an order of soloing? Do they change the soloing? Is it cued? And I have to say, I've listened to this album. This is a proper full-on free jazz album. I would say this is a difficult listen. I would love the chance to really get my head into this to see what I can learn from it and get from it by listening. That would be a great challenge. It's one of the greatest albums ever made in terms of jazz history. It gives the name free jazz its name. So yeah, that's what I've got at number 21. And that there was number 30 to 21 on my list of my essential jazz albums. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you found it interesting. What's going to come up next? There was a pretty good albums there. What am I going to have? What's going to be number 1? You're going to have to wait around and come across and listen tomorrow. So you know what to do. And if you like this, like and subscribe. I've got a Patreon. You can go and join that. Free member if you want, or paid up member. Go and check on it. If you're a free member, there's loads of stuff there. Loads of stuff. And I've got a couple of my radio shows over there. If you like all this music, go over there and have a listen to a couple of the free radio shows. But if you become a paid up member, you're going to get about two radio shows a week if I can keep it up. I'm trying to, and I love it because it's the heart of what I'm doing here. You know, and everything you hear are actual direct recordings of the vinyl albums in the back here. You actually hear my vinyl albums on my radio show. You hear me messing up as I miss the quiet bit between the tracks. You can become a member here as well. I've got members content coming out. You could become a drum member for even cheaper price and just access the drum tuition stuff that I'm doing. It's very low budget. It's just me behind a kit chatting and just see where we go with it. But I hope that some of you drummers will hook up to that. People seem to be enjoying what I'm doing. And I have a PayPal tip jar if you want to give me a donation. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see you tomorrow, where we'll be going to go from number 20 down to number 11.